We often say history is written by the winners. And while that may hold true in some cases, I'm inclined to disagree. Because history, in my opinion, is largely a product of knowledge, or lack thereof. Just think back to any major event, any trend, conquest, advance, or failure. It usually comes back to what the people knew and what they didn't know at the time. And trust me, nothing destroys a civilization, a people, or a nation more than the loss or absence of knowledge. That was the argument I often made during my academic career, which spanned 3 decades at 2 major universities. And as a former historian, I focused much more on what people knew rather than what they did. Now, I say former because, well, let's just say there's a reason why I'm no longer working a tenured position in the hallowed halls of academia. It's actually the same reason why I'm recording this message from an undisclosed location. But before you write me off as some paranoid eccentric, I urge you to listen to my story. Because ignorance in this case is not a wise recourse. In fact, it may have already doomed us all, and no, that is not hyperbole. How do I know this? Well, I certainly didn't figure it out on my own. In fact, someone much smarter and more capable than me already did that, and he did it nearly a century ago. That someone's name was Nikola Tesla. And if you spend any amount of time on the internet, you probably know who he is. But trust me, you do not know his full story. I mean, yes, he was a famous inventor. And yes, he was responsible for the alternating current, which is probably powering your home at this very moment. And yes, he did famously feud with Thomas Edison. Those are all simple, verifiable facts. But if you dig just a little bit deeper, you'll uncover some of the more colorful stories about this man. And it's here where the history of Nikola Tesla tends to obscure our actual knowledge about the man. Now, it is true that he was eccentric. The man did have some serious mental issues that set him apart from his peers, to say the least. But the extent of those eccentricities have been embellished and exaggerated over the years, and not just due to hearsay and anecdotes. But if there was one quirk that best defined Nikola Tesla, it was this. The man was intent on using his inventions to tap into the forces of nature. He genuinely believed that doing so would lead mankind into a golden age. And having come from the war-torn lands of Eastern Europe, he was more motivated than most to guide us towards that age. Now, the technology he helped foster did plenty in that regard. We certainly wouldn't be where we are today as a civilization without the work of Nikola Tesla. But that was never going to be enough for him. Tesla never intended to just settle on helping us channel the power of electricity. He believed there were other forces of nature to tap into. And he spent a good chunk of his life studying those forces. But this is usually where his story diverges from established history. And it's also where my own story enters the picture. You see, when I was still a credible academic, I specialized in studying major figures in the early 20th century. But I took a special interest in Nikola Tesla because there were just so many strange stories about the man, especially during the latter years of his life. There was his obsession with healing sick pigeons, him allegedly contacting aliens on Mars, and the rumors that he was working on a death ray. Even for someone who lived in the modern era, there was a lot to sift through with this man. But I still took on that challenge, because I thought the true extent of Tesla's story deserved to be told. Or, at the very least, I hoped to debunk some of the weirder elements of his story. But that's not what ultimately happened. What I found, and what we as a people lost when Tesla died, it's really not a stretch to say that it might end up being the biggest loss in human history. Now, I'll skip the part where I talk about Tesla's early life and how he became a famous inventor. That part of his story is already well established. Now, I did delve into that, but I didn't find anything too shocking. I mean, yeah, some of his eccentricities were grossly exaggerated, but the reason for that, well, that's where my research took an unexpected turn. If there was a turning point, it happened with the fire that destroyed his New York laboratory in March of 1895. Now, in some internet circles, this event is deemed much worse than the destruction of the Library of Alexandria, because all his works, his notes, and his schematics, they all just went up in flame. And people love to speculate on what kind of technology we lost in that fire. But in my research, I managed to uncover one forgotten detail. Before the fire had spread, one of Tesla's aides managed to save one critical notebook. And that notebook contained a schematic that Tesla himself said was his most prized possession. He told all of his aides in no uncertain terms that if everything in his lab was destroyed, it wouldn't matter so long as that notebook was saved. What was in that notebook? Well, that took even more digging. Because after that fire, Tesla became very protective of it. On top of that, he believed that fire was no accident. And whoever said it, their primary goal was actually to destroy that notebook. Sure, he might have been a bit paranoid, but the more I learned about that fire, the more I came to share his sentiments. Because everything Tesla did after that, his work at Wardenclyffe, his contributions to wireless communications, and even his efforts to make a death ray, it was all secondary to him. His top priority was always to turn the information in that notebook into something real. And here's where things get really interesting because, well, he eventually succeeded. And I know he succeeded because I found what he created. How did I find it? How did I even know where to look? Well, that's a rather long story, complete with a few actions on my part that I'd rather not recount. I'll just say that tracking that notebook and finding that prototype, I had to break more than a few laws, and I also had to work with some less than savory individuals along the way. I won't say I'm sorry, but I am still not over what I did to find this thing. I've always been a bit obsessive when it comes to my work, but I don't know. Maybe the spirit of Tesla himself started pushing me, hoping someone would uncover this device before it was too late. Does thinking that make me crazy? I don't know, maybe it does, but I do know this. Nikola Tesla never intended for that device to stay hidden. Now, how it ended up in some old World War II bomb shelter on the outskirts of New York City, I still don't know. That's probably a hell of a story in and of itself. But the particulars don't matter here. All that matters was that I found the notebook, I found the shelter, and when I opened it, courtesy of some equipment I'd borrowed from the university, I found his device. Now, I certainly don't know what to call it. I just know that Tesla himself called it the electromagnetic chronoscope. And whatever you're picturing, I promise it looks nothing like you're imagining. If I had to describe it, I would liken it to a cross between a TV screen, a Tesla coil, and a vacuum chamber. I know, that's not exactly descriptive, but what it looked like didn't matter as much as what it did. According to Tesla's notes, well, the parts I could understand at least, it allowed its users to visualize the structure of time. How that worked, I couldn't begin to tell you. So rather than try, here's exactly what Tesla wrote about it in a letter to a former assistant. In theory, the chronoscope does for time what the telegraph does for radio waves. I have long suspected that time, much like electricity, space, gravity, and magnetism, has a certain structure to it. The revelations of Professor Einstein and his theory of relativity appear to confirm this. So by calibrating the oscillators with sufficient energies and through phased conversions that I have calculated, it should be possible to see time itself, not unlike how lightning allows us to see electricity. And through further calibrations, it may even be possible to see new manifestations of time, thereby creating a literal window into the past and even the future. That letter was written in 1936. The tone was one of genuine excitement. Tesla seemed to believe that with this device, he could see the future and the past. And him being a man of science and me being a historian, I genuinely shared that excitement. Now, I was able to confirm that Tesla had been working on that device for over 20 years by that point. But he didn't complete it until January 5th, 1943, 2 days before his death. It ended up being Tesla's last invention. Now that alone should have been reason enough for me not to turn on the damn thing. But having come this far, I just couldn't help myself. I foolishly took the device from the shelter, loaded it into a rented truck, and took it back to the university. There I broke into one of the labs to hook it up. It needed a lot of power to operate, more so than I could get from my garage at home. But after a little tinkering, I managed to get it working. And God help me, I really, really wish I hadn't. Because when the chronoscope turned on, it showed me things. I saw with my own mortal eyes the true nature of time. I swear, I could spend every waking moment of every lifetime that every human ever lived, and I still would not be able to put into words what I saw. You know how some claim to see the face of God? Well, this thing made that seem downright mundane by comparison. At first, I was in such awe. I remember breaking down in tears, so happy and elated that I had uncovered this lost artifact of history. But then, what I saw quickly changed, and as I gazed deeper into the spectacle that was time itself, I saw something. Actually, it would be more accurate to say I saw someone. For the briefest of moments, I thought I was looking at the Almighty himself, but then this figure formed on the display. And no, it was not human. It wasn't divine either. It was something much, much worse. While I was trying to make sense of it all, more images came into focus. The images revealed what appeared to be my hometown. In fact, it looked exactly like the road I'd driven down on my way to the university. But what I was seeing wasn't happening in the present. It was actually unfolding in the future. And that same figure I just saw, it was manifesting in the sky above. Day turned into this dark, eerie twilight, and night turned into this thick, inky blackness, devoid of the moon and any stars. And the people below, watching this figure appear, were then overcome with the utmost terror. Every man, woman, and child on every corner of the planet, they all stood paralyzed by fear. And when the figure reached down to them, it was like their minds, bodies, and souls experienced millennia of anguish in the span of a few seconds. At that moment, the chronoscope broke down. The whole lab went dark. But I swear, I didn't flinch in the slightest. I just remained where I stood, alone in the dark, broken and aghast at what I saw. I don't know how long I remained in that state. It's kind of a miracle I didn't end up in a mental ward, locked in a straitjacket and medicated into oblivion. I just know that if Nikola Tesla saw what I just saw, he had to know that he just created the most important invention of his life. Even though his life ended 2 days later, he'd done it. He created a window in time, one in which we could see our ultimate fate. But that fate was horrific. And I'm convinced that this is what led to his death. What he saw broke him, more so than it broke me. And what happened in the weeks after my discovery, it really was a blur. I became unstable, to say the least. My friends and colleagues at the university thought I'd lost it. In some ways, they were right. I tried to get them to study the chronoscope, but considering how many laws I'd broken to find it, they'd refused. And in my outrage, I took a baseball bat and destroyed it, along with much of the lab. That was enough to get me fired, and it also got me arrested. I really should be in jail right now, but I'm not. And the reason for that, I'd rather not say. But it doesn't ultimately matter. Hell, I'm not sure anything matters at this point. Not for much longer. Because that terrifying vision of the future I saw, it's almost upon us. We do not have much time left. I don't even know if it's too late to do anything. Just know that I have every intention of going dark after this, bracing for whatever horrible fate that figure will bring. But before I go, I'll share one last excerpt from Tesla's notebook, which he made just hours after completing his last invention. This will likely be the last entry in this journal. The first test of the chronoscope was technically a success, but never in my life have I regretted such success. I saw the true form of time. I saw manifestations of the past, present, and future. But I also saw it, whatever it is, whoever it is. I can only surmise that it has always been here. And we, every living being on this planet, we have always been its prisoners. We are all trapped in its web, and it is the hungry spider preparing us for its next meal. If its only goal were to consume us, that might be preferable. But this being is not of this world, or of this universe even. It is a predator born of pure time. And it will consume us all. It will exact endless ages of torment upon us. By my calculations, we have less than 100 years. I hope I am wrong. Never in my life have I hoped to be so wrong. I may not get a chance to find out. I already have enemies who know of my intentions. I know for a fact they will destroy or misuse this knowledge. Therefore, I must take the necessary precautions. If we fail to act on this knowledge, we will all face a fate far, far worse than death.